"This ring is embarrassing," she sneered at my proposal. I'd spent 3 months planning what I thought would be the perfect evening at Alinea, the rooftop restaurant where we'd had our first date 2 years ago. The Chicago skyline glittered behind us as I dropped to one knee, my grandmother's vintage solitaire catching the candlelight in my trembling hands. I'd practiced this moment a dozen times in my apartment mirror, rehearsing how I'd tell Stephanie about the ring's history, how my grandfather had saved for months to buy it in 1952, working double shifts at the steel mill, how my grandmother had worn it proudly for 63 years until she passed it down to me with a whispered, "For the right girl, Marcus. Someone who understands what real love looks like." I'd even researched the technical details. A quarter-carat round diamond in a classic Tiffany setting, appraised at $4,200 for its vintage craftsmanship and sentimental value. But the words never made it past my lips. Stephanie's laughter cut through the intimate atmosphere like breaking glass, loud enough that conversations at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence. "Did you seriously get this from a vending machine?" she announced, her voice carrying across the restaurant with theatrical disgust. "I mean, I know you're not exactly rolling in money, but come on, Marcus. This looks like something from a cereal box." My coworker Jessica just got engaged last month and her ring was 3 carats from Harry Winston. 3 carats? That's what a real proposal looks like. The elderly couple at the corner table exchanged uncomfortable glances while a young family quickly looked away, their children staring openly until their parents redirected their attention. I felt my face burn as 20 sets of eyes turned toward our table, some curious, others clearly pitying the man still kneeling with a rejected ring. The hostess near the elevator shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check her reservation book while obviously eavesdropping. The ring that had symbolized 3 generations of enduring love suddenly felt heavy and worthless in my palm, reduced to nothing more than an inadequate gesture by someone who measured affection in carats and brand names. "Stephanie, this was my grandmother's ring," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "She wanted me to give it to someone special. It's been in our family for 70 years. She rolled her eyes dramatically, gathering her Chanel purse with the same disdain she might show a street vendor's knockoff. "Your grandmother had terrible taste then, Marcus. I deserve better than costume jewelry. I deserve a man who knows how to treat a woman properly, who understands that a proposal is supposed to be about showing the world how much I'm worth to him." The finality in her voice hit me like a physical blow, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "When you're ready to buy me a real ring, something from Tiffany's that costs at least $10,000, not some dusty family relic that looks like it came from an antique store clearance bin, then maybe we can talk about marriage. Until then, don't embarrass yourself like this again. And definitely don't embarrass me." She stood abruptly, her Louboutin heels clicking against the hardwood as she strode toward the elevator without looking back, her head held high as if she were the victim in this scenario. I remained frozen on one knee, the rejected ring burning in my palm while the restaurant's soft jazz continued playing as if nothing had happened. Other diners began returning to their conversations, but I caught whispered fragments. "Poor guy, what a nightmare, dodged a bullet there." The maitre d' approached quietly after several minutes, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes genuinely kind. "Sir, please don't worry about tonight's bill. Sometimes life has a way of showing us who people really are before we make permanent mistakes. That young lady just saved you years of heartache." His words were gentle, but they couldn't ease the crushing realization that I'd been planning a future with someone who saw my most treasured family heirloom as an embarrassing inadequacy. As I finally stood and carefully pocketed the ring, I understood that Stephanie's rejection wasn't just about a piece of jewelry, it was about fundamental values that could never be reconciled. She wanted a lifestyle and status symbols, while I'd been offering a life built on love, tradition, and genuine partnership. 2 days after the humiliation at Alinea, I was still processing what had happened when my phone buzzed with Instagram notifications that made my blood run cold. Stephanie had posted a carousel of photos showing off a massive diamond engagement ring that could have paid my rent for 6 months. Her manicured fingers splayed dramatically against designer handbags and champagne flutes at what looked like the Peninsula Hotel's rooftop bar. The caption read, "Finally found my soulmate who knows how to treat a queen." Derek surprised me with the proposal of my dreams at the Four Seasons penthouse. When you know your worth, you don't settle for less. Some people understand that love means showing up with actions, not empty promises. #blessed, #real love, #upgrade complete, #know your worth. I scrolled through the comments, watching her friends gush over the gorgeous ring and perfect couple, with responses like, "You deserve the best," and "Finally a man who appreciates you properly," while my mind reeled from the timeline. Derek, her ex-boyfriend from college, the investment banker she'd claimed was just a friend, whenever I'd asked about their increasingly frequent coffee meetings and late-night text conversations. She'd been planning her exit strategy while I was planning our future, probably laughing with him about my grandmother's pathetic antique and my sad financial situation. The betrayal hit deeper than the public rejection itself. I'd been a placeholder, someone to keep her comfortable and provide emotional stability until her real target became available again. The mathematical precision of her timing was almost impressive. She'd managed to line up her upgrade before discarding me, ensuring zero gap in her lifestyle maintenance. I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, staring at the ring box on my coffee table while her engagement photos burned into my phone screen, feeling something shift inside me from heartbreak to crystalline determination. Instead of wallowing in self-pity like she probably expected, I opened my laptop and did something completely impulsive. I booked a round-trip ticket to Paris, using the money I'd been religiously saving for our honeymoon fund. If Stephanie thought my grandmother's ring was an embarrassment, maybe I needed to find someone who understood that some things are worth more than their price tag, someone who valued history and sentiment over social media bragging rights. The Air France flight left in 4 days, which gave me just enough time to request vacation days from my consulting firm and research something I'd remembered from Stephanie's endless social media updates. Her sister Emma was getting married next month at some chateau outside Paris, and Stephanie had been posting constantly about her bridesmaid duties, alternating between complaints about destination wedding expenses and shameless bragging about the exclusive venue's Instagram worthiness. The irony was absolutely perfect. While she was in Paris flaunting her new engagement and trying to upstage the actual bride, I'd be there too, discovering what the city had to offer someone who valued substance over status symbols. I researched photography tours, art museums, family-owned bistros tucked away in hidden arrondissements, all the authentic experiences Stephanie had always dismissed as too touristy or not worth posting about whenever I'd suggested European travel during our relationship. My grandmother had always talked about Paris with such reverence, describing it as a city where romance lived in every corner cafe and cobblestone street, where she and my grandfather had honeymooned in 1953. Maybe it was time to honor her memory properly, with someone who would appreciate the ring's history rather than mock its modest size. As I packed my best suit and carefully tucked the ring box into my carry-on, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months of planning the perfect proposal. Genuine excitement about the future and my own possibilities. Stephanie could have her blood diamond and banker boyfriend with his leveraged lifestyle. I was going to Paris to find something real. The cafe in Montmartre appeared like something from a movie set, tucked between a vintage bookstore and an artist's studio near Sacré-Cœur, with mismatched chairs spilling onto cobblestones and the scent of fresh croissants mixing with morning coffee. I'd been wandering the winding streets for 2 hours, jet-lagged but oddly energized, when I spotted her through the window, a woman with dark hair pulled back loosely, completely absorbed in editing photos on her laptop while balancing a café au lait and what looked like a pain au chocolate. She had this natural elegance that seemed effortless, wearing a simple cream sweater and jeans that somehow looked more sophisticated than anything Stephanie had ever assembled from her designer collection. When she looked up and caught me staring, instead of the annoyed expression I expected, she smiled and gestured to the empty chair across from her table. "American?" she asked in accented English when I approached hesitantly. "The lost tourist expression gave you away, though you dress better than most." I laughed, settling into the wrought iron chair that wobbled slightly on the uneven stones. "Marcus. And guilty as charged on both counts. Though I prefer to think of myself as temporarily geographically challenged rather than lost." "Isabella," she replied, extending a paint-stained hand that somehow made her seem more interesting rather than less polished. And that's a very diplomatic way of admitting you have no idea where you are. Her directness was refreshing after years of Stephanie's passive-aggressive communication style. We fell into conversation as naturally as breathing, talking about everything from the street art she was photographing for a travel magazine assignment to my grandmother's stories about post-war Paris. Isabella listened with genuine interest when I described my family's connection to the city, asking thoughtful questions about my grandmother's memories rather than immediately steering the conversation toward herself. "Your grandmother sounds like she understood what makes Paris special," Isabella said, refilling our cups from the carafe the server had left. "It's not the monuments or the shopping, it's the moments between people, the conversations that happen over coffee that last 3 hours without anyone checking their phone." I realized I hadn't looked at my device once since sitting down, a stark contrast to dinners with Stephanie where she'd photographed every course for Instagram before taking a single bite. "What brings you to Paris for work?" I asked, genuinely curious about her photography beyond the polite conversation I was used to making. "Friend's wedding, actually," she said, scrolling through camera shots on her laptop screen. "I'm doing the photography as a favor, though I'm starting to regret it. The bride is lovely, but her American sister is..." She paused diplomatically, challenging. "Obsessed with getting the perfect social media shots. Complaining about everything from the venue's Wi-Fi to the flower arrangements not being Instagram-worthy enough." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips as the pieces clicked together. The timing, the location, the description of an insufferable American sister focused on social media drama. Isabella was unknowingly describing Stephanie. The universe apparently had a twisted sense of humor, placing me at a cafe table with the photographer who would be documenting Stephanie's bridesmaid performance. But looking across at Isabella's genuine smile and paint-stained fingers, I decided not to reveal the connection immediately. This woman represented everything Stephanie wasn't: authentic, passionate about her work, more interested in capturing real moments than manufacturing fake ones. "Some people see events as experiences," I said carefully, "others see them as content creation opportunities." "Exactly." Isabella's eyes lit up. This sister keeps talking about engagement photo shoots and ring reveals, making everything about her upcoming wedding instead of celebrating her sister's day. She actually asked me to Photoshop her ring to look bigger in the family photos. The irony was almost painful. Here was someone who valued authenticity criticizing the very behavior that had defined my relationship with Stephanie, while I sat holding an engagement ring rejected for not being flashy enough for social media. "That must be frustrating for someone who clearly cares about genuine moments," I said, studying Isabella's expressive face as she described her approach to wedding photography. "I believe photos should capture who people really are, not who they want the internet to think they are. Love isn't about the size of the ring or the expense of the venue, it's about the way couples look at each other when they think no one's watching." As she spoke about family traditions and meaningful relationships, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's ring in my jacket pocket, wondering if I'd finally found someone who might understand its true value. The Château de Vincennes rose from manicured gardens like something from a fairy tale, its medieval towers casting long shadows across the courtyard where Emma's wedding guests mingled during cocktail hour. I'd positioned myself near the ancient stone walls, nursing a glass of champagne while watching the photographer, Isabella, work with quiet efficiency, capturing candid moments between family members and friends. From my vantage point, I could see Stephanie holding court near the fountain, her massive engagement ring catching every ray of sunlight as she gestured dramatically to a group of bridesmaids. Even from 50 yards away, I could hear fragments of her conversation. "Derek's planning to surprise me with a European honeymoon," and "we're looking at houses in Lincoln Park, nothing under 2 million, obviously." She kept checking her phone between poses, probably monitoring her social media engagement, completely oblivious to the fact that her rejection had led me directly to this moment. Isabella approached during a break between formal shots, looking slightly frazzled. "The sister is driving me absolutely insane," she whispered, glancing toward Stephanie's direction. "She's been complaining for 20 minutes that the chateau's Wi-Fi is too slow for her to post live updates. Meanwhile, the bride is having the most beautiful, authentic celebration, and all she cares about is her follower count." Must be refreshing to meet someone who actually appreciates genuine moments, I said, thinking about our coffee conversation earlier that week. We'd spent the past few days exploring Paris together, the Louvre at opening time when it was nearly empty, hidden bistros in the Marais where Isabella knew the owners, sunrise walks along the Seine that felt like scenes from my grandmother's stories. Each hour had reinforced how different she was from Stephanie, curious instead of entitled, generous instead of calculating, present instead of performing. It is, Isabella smiled, her camera hanging around her neck as she studied my face. You know, I've been thinking about what you told me about your grandmother's ring, how it represents 3 generations of love. That's the kind of story that matters, not the price tag or the social media reactions. The sun was setting behind the chateau's towers, casting golden light across the courtyard as the wedding party prepared for the reception. String quartet music drifted from the terrace while guests began moving toward the dining area, but I found myself frozen in place, staring at Isabella's genuine expression. Everything about this moment felt right in a way that my planned proposal to Stephanie never had. The setting was authentic rather than performative, the conversation was about values rather than appearances, and the woman standing before me saw beauty in sentiment rather than status. Isabella, I said, my heart pounding as I reached into my jacket pocket, I need to tell you something about that ring. Her eyes widened as I pulled out the vintage box, dropping to one knee on the ancient stones as wedding guests began to notice the scene unfolding. This belonged to my grandmother, who believed that true love was about finding someone who sees your heart, not your bank account. Someone who values tradition over trends, substance over status. I opened the box, revealing the modest solitaire that had been so cruelly dismissed just weeks earlier. You've shown me what genuine connection feels like, what it means to be with someone who appreciates authenticity. Isabella, will you marry me? The courtyard had gone quiet except for the string quartet, and I could see Stephanie in my peripheral vision, her mouth hanging open in shock as she recognized both me and the ring she'd so publicly rejected. But my focus was entirely on Isabella's face as tears gathered in her eyes, her hand covering her mouth in surprise. Marcus, are you serious? We've only known each other a week. Sometimes a week with the right person teaches you more than years with the wrong one, I replied, thinking about how effortlessly we'd connected, how every conversation had felt like coming home. I know this is crazy, but I also know you're the person my grandmother would have wanted to wear this ring. Isabella glanced around the courtyard, taking in the fairy tale setting and the audience of wedding guests who had stopped to watch our impromptu proposal. When her eyes met mine again, they were shining with joy and certainty. Yes, she said simply, extending her hand as applause erupted from the gathered crowd. Yes, absolutely yes. As I slipped my grandmother's ring onto her finger, I heard Stephanie's voice cutting through the celebration. Oh my God, that's the pathetic ring he tried to give me. But her outrage was drowned out by genuine cheers from strangers who recognized romance when they saw it, making our moment even more perfect by contrast. Isabella's assistant photographer, Marie, had captured the entire proposal sequence from multiple angles, her professional instincts kicking in despite being off-duty for the reception. Within an hour of our engagement, she'd posted the photos across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook with a caption that would change everything. When real love wins over materialism sparkles, this American tourist just proposed with his grandmother's vintage ring after his ex rejected it for being embarrassing. Sometimes the trash takes itself out so the treasure can find its proper home. Hashtag real love, hashtag vintage rings, hashtag Paris proposal, hashtag know your worth, hashtag authentic moments. The post included the backstory I'd shared with Isabella over coffee, complete with details about the ring's 3-generation history and my ex's public humiliation at the Chicago restaurant. Marie had even managed to capture Stephanie's horrified expression in the background of one shot, her face a perfect picture of regret and fury as she realized her cast-off was being celebrated by strangers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 3 hours, the post had garnered 50,000 likes and hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories about materialistic exes and meaningful family heirlooms. This is what real romance looks like, wrote one user. That ring has more love in it than any blood diamond, commented another. The hashtag grandma's ring began trending as people posted photos of their own inherited jewelry, creating a viral movement celebrating sentimental value over price tags. By midnight, lifestyle bloggers and relationship podcasters were reaching out to request interviews about our fairy tale revenge romance, while wedding photography accounts reshared the images with captions about authentic love conquering shallow materialism. The story had resonated with thousands of people who'd experienced similar rejections or pressures to prove their worth through expensive purchases. Meanwhile, Stephanie discovered the viral posts during Emma's reception when wedding guests began showing her their phones with barely concealed glee. I watched from across the terrace as her face cycled through denial, rage, and humiliation while she realized her cruelest moment was now international social media content. She tried to position herself as the victim in her own engagement announcement, claiming she'd upgraded from someone who didn't appreciate her worth, but the viral narrative painted her as the shallow antagonist who'd missed out on true love for materialistic reasons. Her attempts to damage control were spectacular failures that only generated more negative attention. She posted angry Instagram stories claiming the viral posts were harassment and that people didn't know the whole story, but her defensive tone and obvious desperation made her look even worse. One particularly tone-deaf story showed her flaunting Derek's expensive ring while complaining about people who don't understand luxury, which was immediately screenshot and shared thousands of times as evidence of her priorities. The comment sections became brutal as strangers analyzed her previous posts, finding patterns of materialistic behavior and entitlement that supported the narrative of her rejecting genuine love for financial gain. "Imagine being so shallow you mock a family heirloom," read one viral tweet with screenshots of her Instagram stories. "She really thought she traded up but ended up becoming the villain in someone else's love story," commented another user whose response garnered 12,000 likes. Emma later told Isabella that Stephanie had locked herself in the chateau's powder room for an hour, frantically texting Derek and her friends for support while guests whispered and pointed whenever she appeared. The bride was reportedly furious that her sister's drama was overshadowing her wedding day, especially since many guests had seen the viral posts and were more interested in discussing the proposal than celebrating Emma's marriage. By the end of the reception, #Stephanie the ring rejecter was trending alongside #grandma's ring, with memes comparing materialistic girlfriends to authentic partners flooding social media platforms. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a cautionary tale about the consequences of valuing appearances over genuine connection, while Isabella and I found ourselves at the center of a global conversation about what love truly means. Within 48 hours of our engagement going viral, Stephanie had hired a Chicago entertainment lawyer who specialized in social media harassment cases, demanding that all platforms remove content related to what she termed a coordinated attack on my reputation and privacy. Her legal team sent cease and desist letters to Marie, Isabella, and even me, claiming defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress based on our malicious campaign to destroy my professional and personal relationships. The lawyer's response was almost comical in its desperation, arguing that sharing a public proposal and its backstory constituted harassment, despite the fact that everything described had occurred in public spaces with multiple witnesses. Isabella and I consulted with a Parisian attorney who specialized in international social media law, who explained with barely concealed amusement that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and public marriage proposals are inherently public events that cannot be claimed as private harassment. The legal threats backfired spectacularly when major news outlets picked up the story of a woman trying to censor her own viral rejection, framing it as an assault on free speech and authentic storytelling. The hashtag free speech not diamond rings began trending as journalists and legal experts weighed in on the futility of trying to erase public behavior through litigation. Meanwhile, Derek was conducting his own investigation into his fiancée's viral notoriety, scrolling through years of Stephanie's social media history and discovering a pattern of materialistic relationship behavior that the viral attention had brought to light. Emma later confided to Isabella that Derek had confronted Stephanie about her previous relationships, specifically asking why she'd stayed with me for 2 years if I was as inadequate as she'd claimed in her defensive posts. His investment banking background had given him a keen eye for risk assessment, and he was beginning to realize that Stephanie's financial expectations and social media obsession represented significant long-term liabilities rather than assets. The viral story had also attracted attention from lifestyle bloggers and relationship podcasters who wanted to interview Isabella and me about our fairy tale revenge romance, leading to appearances on 3 major relationship podcasts where we shared our perspectives on authentic love versus materialistic expectations. Our story resonated with audiences who'd experienced similar pressures to prove their worth through expensive purchases, turning our accidental viral moment into a platform for discussing healthy relationship values. One particularly popular podcast episode, titled From Ring Rejection to Paris Perfection, garnered over 2 million downloads and sparked thousands of listener emails sharing similar stories of materialistic partners and meaningful family heirlooms. Stephanie's attempts to control the narrative continued to backfire when she posted a series of angry response videos claiming that people didn't understand the full context and that she deserved better than secondhand jewelry from dead relatives. These videos were immediately turned into reaction content and memes, with her tone-deaf complaints about harassment being juxtaposed with her own cruel comments about my grandmother's ring, creating a perfect contrast between victim mentality and accountability. Her defensive stance only reinforced the viral narrative that she was shallow and materialistic, while Derek's growing discomfort became visible in his social media activity as he stopped liking or commenting on her posts entirely. The final straw for Derek came when Stephanie appeared on a morning talk show attempting to defend her position, claiming that women deserve partners who show their commitment through meaningful investments, not sentimental trinkets. Her use of the phrase, sentimental trinkets, to describe family heirlooms sparked another wave of viral outrage, with thousands of people sharing photos of their own inherited jewelry and explaining the emotional significance behind pieces that might not have monetary value but represented generations of love and commitment. Derek's mother, according to Emma's reports, was horrified by the interview and demanded that her son reconsider his engagement to someone who showed such disrespect for family traditions and sentimental value. The pressure from his family, combined with the ongoing viral attention and Stephanie's inability to accept responsibility for her behavior, created exactly the kind of drama that successful investment bankers learn to avoid in both their professional and personal lives. 6 months after our impromptu Parisian engagement, Isabella and I were planning our own wedding while building something neither of us had expected, a thriving travel photography business that combined her artistic vision with my business development skills. We decided to base ourselves between Chicago and Milan, with Isabella handling the creative direction while I managed client relations and marketing strategy. Our viral proposal had generated dozens of inquiries from couples wanting us to photograph their own authentic love stories, particularly those involving family heirlooms or non-traditional proposals that prioritized meaning over expense. The success felt organic and genuine, built on shared values rather than social media manipulation or artificial scarcity. Our engagement photos, taken at sunrise on the Ponta Arts with my grandmother's ring prominently featured, had become the header image for our new website alongside testimonials from couples who appreciated our philosophy of capturing real moments rather than manufactured perfection. Meanwhile, Derek had finally ended his engagement to Stephanie after what Emma described as the most awkward family dinner in history, where his parents had grilled her about her viral interview and her attitude toward family traditions. The final breaking point came when Stephanie suggested they hire a publicist to rehabilitate her image, using Derek's family connections and financial resources, essentially asking him to fund a campaign to make people forget her materialistic behavior rather than acknowledging that her actions had consequences. Derek's mother had reportedly told Emma that she couldn't imagine welcoming someone into the family who showed such disrespect for sentimental value and family legacy, referring specifically to Stephanie's dismissal of inherited jewelry as trinkets from dead relatives. The breakup had been swift and decisive, with Derek returning the engagement ring and asking Stephanie to move out of his Lincoln Park penthouse within 2 weeks. In a desperate attempt to salvage her situation, Stephanie had reached out to me through Emma, claiming she'd made a terrible mistake and always loved me deep down, asking if we could talk things through like adults. The message came through while Isabella and I were taste-testing wedding cakes at a small Parisian bakery, laughing over my terrible French pronunciation as I tried to order tart aux phrases. I showed Isabella the text, watching her roll her eyes with amused disbelief. "Should I be concerned about the competition?" she asked with mock seriousness, gesturing to her engagement ring. "I hear she has strong opinions about jewelry standards." "I think you're safe," I replied, screenshotting the message before deleting it entirely. Some people only realize what they had after they've thrown it away for something shinier. Isabella's response was perfect in its understated elegance. She posted a photo of our wedding planning progress on Instagram, showing fabric swatches, venue photos, and her hand wearing my grandmother's ring while holding a fountain pen over invitation samples. The caption read, "6 months of planning our Paris wedding and falling more in love with this ring every single day. Thank you to everyone who helped us find each other through life's unexpected turns. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with someone else's ending. #grandma's ring, #Paris wedding, #authentic love, #second chances at love." The post gained thousands of likes within hours, with comments from followers who'd been following our story since the viral proposal, but it was the subtle grace of Isabella's approach that impressed me most. She'd acknowledged Stephanie's existence without naming her, expressed gratitude without gloating, and demonstrated the class that comes from genuine confidence rather than defensive insecurity. Our actual wedding took place on a crisp November morning at the Eiffel Tower's Trocadero Gardens, with just our immediate families and closest friends present for an intimate ceremony that prioritized personal meaning over social media moments. Isabella wore her grandmother's vintage lace dress, altered to fit perfectly, while I carried my grandfather's pocket watch that had been paired with the engagement ring as a set. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Italian, honoring both our heritage and our international love story, with Isabella's cousin serving as photographer to capture genuine moments rather than staged poses. Emma attended as Isabella's matron of honor, having become close friends during the wedding planning process, and she later told us that Stephanie had spent the day posting bitter inspirational quotes about people who steal your life and fake happiness built on revenge. But we were too busy dancing to our first song, a jazz standard my grandmother had loved, to pay attention to social media drama or external negativity. As we spun under the twinkling lights with the Eiffel Tower illuminated behind us, I realized that my grandmother's ring had finally found its perfect home, not because Isabella appreciated its monetary value, but because she understood that some things are worth more than their price tag, and that real love grows stronger when it's built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for the people who came before us.